Honey, you look tired, my sister said, patting my hand. Just cleaning a lot these days. Her voice dripped with the pity I'd become accustomed to. A subtle dig. My family, bless their hearts, saw me as a glorified janitor. 40 years old, divorced, pushing a mop. That was their Jake. Little did they know, the gleaming floors I buffed at Sterling Ventures were, in a very real sense, mine. I watched the executives in their tailored suits, their voices echoing in the pristine hallways, discussing quarterly profits, market trends, and billion-dollar acquisitions. They saw a cleaning guy, a nobody. They had no idea the nobody owned 65% of the company. They were just puppets dancing to a tune I was writing. Coffee. I asked, wiping down a conference room table as Richard Sterling strode past, his chest puffed out, a peacock in a pinstripe suit. He was the one who stole my company years ago. Funny how things work. My journey began with a handshake and a promise. Fresh out of Wharton, Richard and I were inseparable, fueled by ambition and cheap beer. We were going to change the world, one IPO at a time. Our shared vision birthed Sterling Ventures in 2000. I handled the analytics, the financial modeling, the due diligence. Richard, with his golden tongue, charmed investors and closed deals. We complemented each other, or so I thought. The 2008 financial crisis hit and the market tanked. Richard saw an opportunity. While I was across the country, at my mother's bedside, watching her fade, Richard was busy. He forged documents, spread rumors of my incompetence, and convinced the board to oust me. I returned to a locked office, a severance package, and a reputation in tatters. Heartbreak, the pivotal moment, I was standing outside the Sterling Ventures building, watching them celebrate their survival. I could have confronted them, made a scene, taken them to court. But the thought of fighting their legal machine felt exhausting. The truth wouldn't have mattered. I chose silence, a different path. I would build an empire from the ashes. I liquidated my assets, every stock, every bond, and every penny went into a shell corporation. I started small, buying Sterling Ventures stock when Richard's aggressive expansions backfired. The first few months were brutal. Ramen noodles and late nights. The burden was heavy, the secret weighing me down. My social circle evaporated. Friends and family couldn't understand why I was suddenly so unavailable. They saw a downward spiral, not a calculated ascent. My first substantial purchase, 10% of Sterling Ventures, was a victory. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, knowing Richard's arrogance was funding my comeback. I kept it hidden. He'd never suspect the janitor. The biggest thrill? Hearing him boast about record profits, unaware that I was the primary beneficiary. I built slowly. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and trusts became my tools. Each acquisition was a calculated move, each dip in the market an opportunity. The years blurred into a series of strategic investments, each one bringing me closer to my goal. It wasn't about revenge, though that fueled me in the beginning. It was about justice, about proving my worth, about reclaiming what was stolen. Then came the Titan Industries merger. I knew the numbers, the debt, the mismanagement. Richard was gambling. He was playing a game he couldn't win, and I, the silent observer, held all the cards. Now it was time to show my hand. The shareholder vote was scheduled. The board was in place. My tailored suit was ready. The portfolio, meticulously curated over a decade, now held assets exceeding $3.2 billion. Sterling Ventures, with its 65% controlling stake, was just the tip of the iceberg. Beyond the company, I controlled a network of shell corporations registered in the Caymans, Luxembourg, and Singapore. These entities held diversified investments in tech startups, real estate, and renewable energy. My net worth, I estimated, hovered around $4 billion. The janitor had become a titan of industry, a quiet force reshaping markets from the shadows. Every morning, while pushing my cleaning cart past the gleaming mahogany doors of the boardroom, I'd hear Richard and his cronies discussing their next acquisition. They'd openly dismiss the cleaning staff as if we were mere furniture, oblivious to the fact that I was privy to their every secret, every blunder. I heard the whispers of their clandestine meetings, the details of their reckless spending, the panicked conversations about their plummeting stock prices. I knew about the shady dealings with Titan Industries management, the inflated valuations, the impending legal battles. It was all meticulously documented, stored in encrypted files on a secure server, far removed from the prying eyes of the Sterling Ventures IT department. My daily interactions were a performance, a carefully crafted act of humility. I'd nod respectfully to Richard, offer a polite good morning while he barked orders, and listen patiently to the complaints of the office staff, all the while knowing I held their futures in my hands. The irony was a constant companion. They saw a man with a mop, a symbol of low status. They didn't see the man who could, at any moment, dismantle their empire. I'd frequent the same diner as Richard, overhearing him boast about his brilliant, strategic moves to his sycophantic entourage. I'd see the disdain in his eyes when he passed me in the hallway, knowing I'd made the same trip to the bank to invest in his own company. I'd have lunch at the same greasy spoon, listening to the gossip about his latest affair. It was a constant, frustrating reminder of his arrogance, his obliviousness. Yet those moments fueled me. They were the fuel that kept me going, the fire that kept me focused on my goal. My strategic decisions had always been based on patience and precision. I'd let Richard's blunders create opportunities. I'd quietly acquire shares when the market punished his mistakes. I'd listen to his bluster, his boasts, and his lies, knowing the truth would eventually surface. My biggest victory. The time I used my hidden funds to buy enough stock to block a disastrous deal with a failing airline, a move that cost Richard millions. It was a silent blow, delivered from the shadows, a testament to the power of my clandestine control. The day of the shareholder vote was approaching. I'd sent a carefully worded letter to each board member, outlining my intentions. The response was a mix of fear and anticipation. The legal team at Sterling Ventures, oblivious to my true identity, were already scrambling to prepare for a potential hostile takeover. The tension within the company was palpable. Richard, however, remained blissfully unaware, convinced he was about to secure his legacy. He even asked me to polish his shoes that morning, a request I fulfilled with a quiet smile. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise. I found myself in the men's room, staring at my reflection. The tailored suit felt alien, a costume. I tugged at the silk tie, the knot too tight. My hands trembled as I checked the contents of my briefcase, the irrefutable evidence, the forged documents, the manipulated financial statements, the recorded phone calls, all painstakingly compiled, all ready to be presented. The air grew thick with anticipation. The CEO of Titan Industries, sweating visibly, nervously adjusted his tie. Richard, oblivious, was the picture of self-assuredness, his smile radiating smug confidence. The board members, a collection of carefully selected yes men, sat rigid, their faces masks of polite indifference. They were all in for a shock. My phone buzzed. A text. "Are you ready?" It was from my lawyer, whom I'd hired years ago, a shrewd woman who knew the game. "Yes," I texted back, my fingers steady. "Let's begin." I took a deep breath, the scent of lemon-scented cleaning fluid fading in my memory. The boardroom door swung open, and I stepped into the gilded cage of Sterling Ventures. Richard's gaze swept over me, dismissing me as a mere attendant. "Ah, Olson," he said, barely glancing my way. "Make sure we don't get any smudges on these documents. This is a historic day." I took a position near the back of the room, allowing the hum of anticipation to fill the space. I listened as Richard presented his case, his voice booming with confidence. He outlined the benefits of the Titan Industries merger, the expansion of Sterling Ventures, the financial gains. The presentation was slick, the numbers impressive, but I knew the truth. They were built on a foundation of lies. My cue came during the question and answer session. I raised my hand. Richard, visibly annoyed, gestured towards me. "Yes, Olson, what can I do for you?" The room went silent. "My name isn't Olson," I said, my voice calm, steady. "It's Jake Sterling." The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Richard's face went pale. The carefully constructed facade began to crack. A ripple of shock, then a tidal wave, washed over the room. Whispers erupted, then shouts, then a stunned silence. Richard's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of bewildered fury. He stammered, his carefully crafted facade crumbling around him. What is the meaning of this?" I walked towards the podium, my tailored shoes echoing on the polished floor, a stark contrast to the quiet shuffle of my work boots. I placed the briefcase on the table, the click of the latches amplifying the tension. "I believe you know, Richard." I began my presentation. I presented irrefutable evidence: the fraudulent documents, the doctored financial statements, the recordings of Richard's backroom deals. The board members shifted, their eyes darting between me and Richard, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and calculation. The Titan Industries CEO began to visibly sweat, his carefully constructed composure disintegrating. Richard erupted. Lies, all lies, he's a disgruntled janitor, he knows nothing. His face was contorted with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. He's trying to destroy everything I've built. The board members, sensing the impending implosion, exchanged panicked glances. The air crackled with unspoken alliances and silent betrayals. I watched as the architects of Richard's empire began to quietly plot their escape. I ignored his outburst, continuing to present the facts, the evidence. Each piece of information I revealed was a blow, a dismantling of the edifice he'd so carefully constructed. I could see the realization dawning in their eyes: they had been deceived. They had trusted the wrong man. The room erupted in chaos. The board members, who had once dismissed me, now scrambled to align themselves with me. Apologies were offered, hands were extended, and the air was thick with opportunism. The whispers turned to shouts. Richard, desperate and enraged, lunged towards me, his fists clenched. Security intervened, ushering him away. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You think you've won?" he screamed, his voice hoarse. "You've ruined everything." The board, witnessing his meltdown, swiftly voted to remove him as CEO. A hush fell over the room. A vote was called for an interim CEO. One name was on everyone's lips. "I nominate Jake Sterling," someone said. Several voices quickly seconded. "All in favor?" The chairman's voice cracked with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The vote was unanimous. My new reality began with a simple statement: "I accept." A slow, satisfying smile spread across my face. The taste of justice was sweet, but the challenges that lay ahead were not lost on me. The first few days were a blur. Phone calls, meetings, and a constant stream of sycophants, all vying for my attention. The office, once a sterile environment of polite indifference, now buzzed with a nervous energy. The same people who had barely acknowledged my existence now treated me with deference, even fear. My sister's pitying glances were replaced by awkward attempts at friendly banter. "So Jake," she said during a family dinner, a forced cheerfulness in her voice, "leading a company is quite the step up from, you know." I simply smiled. Richard, meanwhile, was a ghost, a shadow of his former self. I saw him once, a fleeting glimpse as he stormed out of the building, his face a mask of defeat and bitterness. He didn't see me, and I didn't make myself seen. I knew the fire that had once burned within him had now been extinguished by his own ego. My secretary, a woman who had always been polite but distant, now hovered, anticipating my every need. The janitorial staff, once a collection of nameless faces, now greeted me with a level of respect I'd never experienced. Mrs. Henderson, the head of cleaning, even baked me a cake, a gesture that both amused and touched me. My first act as interim CEO was to address the employees. I stood on the stage, bathed in the harsh glare of the spotlight, a far cry from the shadows of the hallways. I laid out my vision for Sterling Ventures: transparency, fairness, and a commitment to the employees who made the company what it was. I announced a new profit-sharing plan, increased benefits, and a commitment to open communication. The applause was thunderous. But the changes weren't only in the boardroom. I walked the floors, visited each department, and spoke to the employees. I made it a point to meet with the cleaning staff and thank them for their service. I saw their faces light up, their eyes filled with surprise and, I hoped, a sense of pride. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, a warmth that went beyond the thrill of revenge. The Titan Industries deal was immediately canceled. The executives, once so certain of their success, now scrambled to salvage what they could. I initiated an internal audit, uncovering a web of fraudulent practices and unethical dealings. Several high-level executives were fired, their careers ruined. The news made headlines, and the stock price, which had been plummeting, began to stabilize. My new office, once Richard's domain, felt sterile and unfamiliar. I removed the expensive artwork, replaced it with a few photographs, and kept the desk clear of clutter. I needed to remember who I was. One evening, I was working late, sifting through documents, when I heard a knock on the door. It was Sarah, the young woman from the legal department who had helped me assemble the evidence against Richard. She was hesitant, her voice soft. "Can I come in?" I gestured her inside. She stood awkwardly for a moment, then said, I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "For giving us a chance," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "For showing us that things can be different." I smiled. "The chance is for all of us, Sarah." But not everyone was pleased. The old guard, the ones who had profited from Richard's excesses, resented my changes. They saw me as an outsider, a threat to their power. They whispered behind my back, plotted my downfall, and tried to undermine my decisions. But I was ready for them. I had built my own empire, and I knew how to fight. The old habits die hard. One morning, early, I walked into the executive washroom. The cleaning staff had already been in there. I picked up a stray paper towel from the floor and tossed it in the bin. Then, out of habit, I reached for a cleaning spray and wiped the counter. The feeling was familiar and grounding. The familiar scent of lemon, a reminder of the life I left behind and the life I had created. I caught my reflection in the mirror, a man in a tailored suit, a man who had reclaimed his destiny. And I smiled. Years later, I stand on the balcony of my penthouse, overlooking the Chicago skyline, the city lights twinkling below. Sterling Ventures is thriving, a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. The company culture is transformed. My story has become a legend within the walls of Sterling Ventures, a reminder that anyone can rise from the shadows and rewrite their narrative. I've built a legacy of trust and respect, which is far more rewarding than any amount of revenge could ever offer. I still wipe down my desk every morning. A ritual that reminds me to stay humble, to never forget where I came from, and to always remember the cleaning staff. The initial euphoria of victory slowly gave way to the practical realities of running a company. The boardroom, once a symbol of Richard's power, was now my domain, but it came with a new set of challenges. The constant demands on my time, the weight of responsibility, the endless parade of meetings, it was all a far cry from the quiet solitude of my cleaning rounds. I had traded one cage for another, albeit a gilded one. My relationship with my family underwent a seismic shift. My sister, initially stunned by the news, now treated me with a mixture of awe and cautious respect. She had always seen me as the underdog. Now, I was the victor. My ex-wife, upon learning of my success, attempted a reconciliation, but the wounds of the past were too deep. I'd learned that winning didn't erase the past. It just gave you a different view of it. The biggest change was the constant attention. I couldn't walk through the office without being stopped by employees, board members, and even strangers. The janitor who was invisible was now the CEO who was visible everywhere. Some of the newfound respect felt genuine, a genuine appreciation for what I'd overcome. Others, however, were opportunistic, angling for promotions, favors, or simply a piece of the pie. I learned to distinguish between those who genuinely cared about the company and those who were merely interested in their own advancement. The most challenging aspect was the isolation. Even though I was surrounded by people, I often felt alone. The people I could trust were few. The old friendships, forged in the crucible of shared hardship, were stronger. My former best friend, now an executive at the company, was the only one who truly understood my journey. A few weeks after the revelation, I found myself walking into the employee cafeteria. I used to grab a sandwich and blend into the background, listening to the office gossip. Now, as I walked in, conversations stopped. All eyes turned toward me. I felt a pang of discomfort. "Morning, Mr. Sterling," a voice said. It was Maria, one of the cafeteria staff. "Good morning, Maria," I replied, forcing a smile. "How's the coffee today?" She beamed. "It's fresh, sir, extra strong, just the way you like it." I chuckled, a genuine laugh that felt good. "Sounds perfect." I found a table, the silence around me awkward. I ate my sandwich, knowing everyone was watching. Then I spotted a group of younger employees huddled at a table. I decided to break the ice. I walked over to them, a smile on my face. "Mind if I join you?" They looked surprised, then quickly made room. We talked about their work, their aspirations, and their concerns. I listened to their stories. As I sat there, surrounded by the energy of youth, I felt a sense of connection I hadn't experienced in years. One day, while reviewing the budget, I noticed a significant discrepancy. A large sum of money was missing, diverted to an offshore account. It became clear that not all of Richard's cronies had left. Some were still trying to bleed the company dry. This was a stark reminder that the fight wasn't over. I had implemented stricter financial controls, but the rot ran deep. The incident forced me to confront the limitations of my influence and the ongoing need for vigilance. I realized that true leadership wasn't about vengeance, but about building a sustainable future. And that meant making difficult decisions. I had to fire several more executives. The news sent a ripple of fear throughout the company. Some questioned my leadership, others quietly applauded. I knew the next step, I would have to face Richard. It wasn't a matter of retribution, but of closure. I had to find him, to understand the full scope of his deception, and to lay the past to rest. I needed to hear his side of the story, even if it was filled with lies. It was the only way to move on. The final chapter of this saga could only be closed when I confronted the man who had set the entire chain of events in motion, the man who was, in many ways, still a part of me. The next confrontation would define not just the company's future, but also my own. Years may pass and the skyline will change, but the image that lingers is not of the boardroom, nor the tailored suit, but of the man in the shadows, a mop in his hand, the quiet architect of his own destiny. It was a victory hard-earned, a tapestry woven with threads of resentment, cunning, and the unwavering belief in a future he crafted from the ashes of his past. The cost, he knew, was the loss of innocence, the erosion of simple joys, the burden of a secret that, while liberating, had also isolated. But the reward? The ability to look in the mirror and see not a victim, but a survivor. Not a janitor, but a master of his own fate. Now, as the wind whispers through the steel canyons, I'm reminded, we all walk a path unseen, a story untold. Where do you, the overlooked, the underestimated, the silent observer, find your own power, and what will you do with it?